What is the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef? That's the question. Well, I'll tell you what it is. How many people have heard this presentation before, or one by me? So everybody has some basic, but I'll tell you what, it's a real conundrum every year, because there's folks who haven't heard it at all and don't know anything about it, and then there's everybody else who gets bored with the repetition. So I've tried to shorten it up a little bit this year on the basics so we can move on to some other material. What is the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef? Well, it's a nonprofit charitable corporation under the 501c3 code in the IRS tax code. So it's a corporation just like any other corporation. It has articles of incorporation and bylaws and members. So you might ask yourself, who are the members? Be a good question. There's lots of members, lots and lots of members, and there are not this many now. And some have come, some have gone, some have don't re-up. But there's probably been over 100 total members over time. All right, so ready, right? We're good. Okay, these are I've segregated these out into the absolutely essential members of the Global Roundtable, and I've stratified them in terms of who has the most control, who's driving the ship, and who's rowing the boat. Here you have the United Nations, the World Wildlife Fund, and Rabobank. And Rabobank is in there. Rabobank's a Dutch bank, mostly agricultural loan portfolio. It's really a big bank. And they're international in scope, as are all these people. There are retailers, and there's a lot more than this, but there's Walmart and McDonald's, and I've included them as essential, indispensable members of the Global Roundtable because of their scope and their size and their range of play. Then you have the meat packers, Cargill, Tyson. National Beef was purchased by Marfrig. It's a Brazilian company. It's a huge company. You don't hear much about it, but huge. And JBS. Together, those companies right there represent, give or take, 85% of the kill. The Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is not about a marketing program with a premium. It's not another stupid environmental award. It's not something resembling anything that's voluntary. Has anything to do with transparency. It's not a program, this is important, it's not a program driven by consumer demand or choice. Consumers are not driving this. And it's not about some foreign country, some far off land where they're worried about deforesting the rainforest. It's not about that. It's about right here in the United States of America. It's what it is about. It's about an unprecedented attack on you and your family and your liberty and your private property and your way of life. The GRSB, what it really is, this is what it really is. It really is a platform to facilitate collusion against freedom-loving people, particularly beef producers and consumers. It's the smoke-filled room. I don't expect the Global Roundtable to be around indefinitely. Like any other act of collusion, once the game plan is laid down and everybody understands their role and who's in charge and who needs to do what, like the smoke-filled room, it just tends to disappear into the mist. And I expect that will happen with these folks, but the impact will be long-standing. I said it was a platform to facilitate collusion against freedom-loving people. The definition of collusion, I've chosen the word carefully. is a secret or illegal cooperation or conspiracy, especially in order to cheat or deceive others. The people that they want to cheat and deceive are, among others, you. So without messing around with this anymore, let me tell you what the plan is with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Here's the plan. The plan is to force you to take a mandatory radio frequency identification and implant it on every one of the animals that you ever intend to sell. With that RFID, they intend to cause you to have a premises registration, and that ear tag will be affiliated with, associated with, tied to your ranch, the real estate that animal runs on. If you have deeded or leased land, or if you move them somewhere, they're going to want you to have reporting the premises that animal's on at all times. So it amounts to a registration of your premises. They intend to impose on you totally unnecessary environmental and social conditions that amount to nothing more than an excuse to discriminate against you. And they're going to hand this list of the totally unnecessary social and environmental conditions, they're going to hand that to you in the form of a checklist. And the person who's going to hand that to you, who's going to bring that to you, is going to be a third-party verifier. That is a contract person that you will hire that will come out to your place with the checklist they gave him and make sure that you're in compliance with each and every one of the terms and conditions. And if you are in compliance, then you will have your ear tag registered into the computer as marketable. If they say that you're not in compliance, your ear tag does not go in the computer, and that animal is not marketable. You will be denied access to the market. Now that sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds ludicrous. It sounds like somebody made that up. But the reason it sounds crazy to you is because you're not power crazy, rotten, no good human beings that want to impose your will on somebody else. That's why it sounds nuts to you. And I could tell you about this on and on. I could go on and on. But there's a better way to explain this to you. There's a guy, his name is, his name is Jason Clay. He works for the World Wildlife Fund. And if anybody is an architect of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, if any one person is to blame, it's this man. And he's not stupid, and he's not lazy. He is evil.
One of our strategies has always been to take choice away from consumers. Basically, our point is that consumers shouldn't have a choice about sustainability. And the way to do that is to get companies to only buy sustainable raw materials. We need to rehabilitate degraded and underperforming land to take pressure off of natural habitat. And we need to think about consumption. Some places need to consume more, others need to consume less. What it means is that you start measuring what matters, you require third-party verification of that measurement, and you get producers started on a stepwise approach towards continuous improvement. Our approach has really been to work in the supply chain itself to help companies identify better sources, source from producers that are certified, that have reduced measurably their environmental impacts, et cetera. What we've started doing is saying, okay, maybe sustainability isn't a competitive issue. Maybe consumers shouldn't have choice about sustainability. Maybe all the products on the shelf ought to be sustainable. How do we make that happen? We make that happen by getting companies to collude around sustainability. You start measuring what matters. You require third-party verification of that measurement. Once we start measuring stuff, we'll start managing it.
What he just told you is that the World Wildlife Fund and the other, the United Nations and Rabobank, and in this case, Rabobank is just merely a representative of a larger class of giant bankers. So I mean, they just happen to be the one that lends a lot of money in our sector. But they stand in the shoes of lots and lots of banks with huge amounts of assets on deposit. But he intends to jump in the middle of the supply chain and choke it down so that you have to, if you want to get to the market, you will have to go through him. And that's what this is about. So collusion, actually, I didn't choose the word, he chose the word. It's a secret or illegal cooperation or conspiracy in order to cheat or deceive others. His word. Why are they doing this? Why would they want to do this? What's with this? What's the deal? So, and I think you have a tendency, or people have a tendency to look at that big list of members and decide and think that they all have a common motivation, and that's not true. They each have their own different set of motivation. So why are they doing this? It depends on who you're talking about, which one of them you're talking about. So let's talk about these guys again. These people represent, and I'm trying to be nice, Max. I want to be real nice and respectful. These people are elitist pigs. They regard you as dirt, like the cattle you run. They consider you to be animals to be managed. You are totally expendable, and they think that they know what's best for the planet and for you and for society. And these people are all surrogates for each other. That is to say that the World Wildlife Fund, international finance, and the United Nations all represent what I call the primary level of power. So if you want to chase down the power in the world, who actually runs what? It's not the armies, it's not the politicians, it's the banks and the people that are their surrogates. So World Wildlife Fund, they don't care about the environment. What they care about is the power. The United Nations is a sort of a repository of that power, and the true power lies in those banks. So what are they doing? They have come up with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef as a tool, as a mechanism to lever tremendous number of acres, square miles of terrain that we currently use to raise cattle on. And they intend to take that for their own. They're coming for your place. Now this is a diagram. This came from the Federal Reserve Bank, and I think it's a 1995 chart. And it does. I mean, you get the idea. The actual names are not as important, but it's a diagram that maps out the mergers of several different banks between the years of 1990 and 1995. So all of those banks on the left boiled down to 4 banks, and the consolidation has gone full speed ahead since then. So the reason that these people are able to control the corporations is because they have a very limited number of people who control essentially all of the money. And I mean essentially all of the money. If you take out the first, I'm going to say 6 banks in terms of deposits, they have essentially all of the money in the United States. And the consolidation has gone on far past this diagram. But this is authoritative. It comes from the Federal Reserve. So what's in it for the three, the United Nations, the World Wildlife Fund, and the banks? I told you. It's global control. What's in it for these guys, the retailers? You know, I'll give you an example. McDonald's, there's somewhere between 37,000 and 40,000 restaurants. Every one of those restaurants services about 2,000 people a day, and they make X number of dollars on it. They don't make more money on one restaurant than another. According to their business model, what they want to do is just build more and more and more restaurants. Every one that they build, every one that they open, they do that with debt capital. So they go to these bankers, they borrow the money, and they put in another restaurant. And that's how they get bigger. That's how they make their quarterly earnings. So Walmart's the same way. These people are heavily dependent on debt, and they rely on the bankers for that debt. And so they will do what those bankers tell them to do. Now, what they do next is they tell the packers what to do. They tell them what it is they need to do before they'll buy their product. So, what's in it for the retail people? It's their continued existence. And they are no more than those retailers are no more than a banker pawn to lever the packers into doing what they want them to do. So what's in it for the packers? These guys, I'll tell you what they want. They want to vertically integrate the beef business. And if for those of you who understand what that means, these lights are really bright over here, not so bad over here. So I'm going to spend more time looking at these guys. Sorry. Vertical integration, does everybody have an idea of what that might mean? Okay, so what that means is in an economic model, you have a supply chain, and it starts at the bottom where, well, here's an example. They've got 85% of the market. It's the Tyson model. I call it the Tyson model. It's vertical integration. The vertical integration kills competition, it kills price signals, and it kills freedom. And this is the Tyson model. So I got this baby right here. Check this out. Look at that. Pretty nice. You can bring down a Huey helicopter with this baby. I could burn a hole in that. I could burn a hole in that thing right there, but I won't leave it there that long. If you start at the top, or let's start at the bottom, you got the people who grow the feed and the trucking, and you got the breeders. This is the chicken model. You got the breeders, you got the hatchery, you got the chicken grower, the guy who runs the chicken coop. You got the slaughter facility, you've got the processor, and I wrote in there chicken McNuggets because sometimes they do value added. And then you've got the retailer. So what their intention is by vertical integration is to own and control every single step of that production. That's vertical integration. And so what happens is that when you do control that, there's nobody bidding for cheap feed, or there's nobody bidding for chicks to grow. They control all that. And so the value to them is, at the end of the day, when they get all the way up to retail, they never hit competition, true competition, until they get to the meat case at the grocery store, where that chicken leg is up against sirloin steak. And there are different price points, and the consumer gets to decide whether he wants a sirloin steak for more money or a chicken leg for less money. But that's the only place where there's a price signal. So that's the only place that they actually compete. So what happens is that it becomes just merely an accounting issue. So the Tyson has to decide how much they're going to pay or allocate of their retail dollar, how much they're going to allocate to the feed growers and to the truckers, because they own it all, to the breeders, to the hatchery, to the grower, to the slaughter, and to the processor. It's an accounting problem. So they can adjust that however they want. And I retract my statement here. They don't own, the Tyson model does not own the grow house, the chicken coop. They arrange financing for people who come in and build the facility to the Tyson specifications, and they deliver to the man the baby chicks. They deliver the feed. They come in and they bring company men in that tell them exactly how to raise those chickens. They come by on an appointed date and pick up the chickens. And then they will pay that guy just enough to keep him in business. Just enough to keep him in business. And he's essentially a sharecropper. Now I can tell you what they want to do when they want to vertically integrate. And they did this to the pork business. Exactly the same thing to the pork business. And I hear on the radio, hog market. There's like 2 or 3% of the hogs are traded on a competitive market. It's absurd. But this is what they want to do to you guys. So they want to put you in a situation where you will continue to raise the calf, and they will decide how much they're going to pay you. And it will be just enough to keep you coming back next year. So that's vertical integration. Now, horizontal integration is different. Horizontal integration is when you have the same level on the supply chain, but located across, you might have a refinery, and then you might have for gasoline, and then you might have gas stations. So the gas station at every crossroads, that's horizontal integration. So here's how this works out, because they've done this fairly successfully in England and in Ireland and in a lot of the places where they have remnants of the crown, of the British form of government. These guys, the farmers come to town that raise the beef, and they say, we need a bigger share of the dollar. In your accounting process, you need to give us more of that. And they say, no, we checked it out. We think you're doing just fine. And so here's a picture of them protesting in England. And they have no options. This is what they're reduced to because of vertical integration. Now, so get back to what's in it for the packers? Vertical integration is in it for the packers. That's what they want to do. And if they can do that, they will continue to thrive. And so what's going on is at the packer level, they have access, the 4 packers have access to capital. And with that access to capital, they are purchasing more and more packing operations. They're going vertically, they're integrating vertically, and they're integrating horizontally. And the reason that they are able to do that is not because they're just so efficient or that for some reason they have an economy of scale that makes everybody else non-competitive. It's because those bankers have selectively picked them out to control the choke point in the supply chain. So that supply chain, the beef supply chain, is carefully constructed by the bankers to focus production through 4 packers. Now, if you want to sell your beef somewhere, you're going to have to run into these guys sooner or later, or you're going to have to somehow try and weasel your way through 15% of the market, because these guys control the choke point. And it's not because the packers, I don't want to impute evil motives to them. They are strictly in it, playing by the rules that are handed to them. They are strictly playing it by the rules that are handed to them. So then ask yourself this question: what's in it for these guys? Because surely, as I'm standing here, the NCBA and the Beef Checkoff are or have been members of the Global Roundtable. And I think currently the Beef NCBA is, and the Beef Checkoff is not, but it doesn't matter. They're inseparable. So what's in it for these guys? Well, if you examine, Max, I'm trying real hard. Trying real hard. They're parasites, okay? They're parasites. And they have taken the Packers' position on every critical issue, except for maybe a couple where they just could not maintain credibility if they didn't. But they've taken the Packers' position straight across the board every time, whenever it's the Packers or a choice between whose interest they would serve, Packers or producers. It's Packers every time. And what they've got, a $90 million a year slush fund to play with because of the beef checkoff. So your money, and I would hate to even guess the number of dollars, beef checkoff dollars that are generated out of this room every year that go into this project. And I can tell you it's a bunch. So because millions and millions and millions of checkoff dollars go into this beef sustainability project every year. So what's in it for them? They get to live another day. They get to, like a tick on a dog's back, every day that dog's alive, they get another infusion of capital from that beef checkoff. And that's what's in it for them. And they're in this, don't kid yourself, they're in this up to their eyeballs, okay? So here's an example of a brochure for some workshops that they put together back in 2013. And it was co-sponsored by the World Wildlife Fund and the Beef Checkoff. There's your dollars right there. They put out a beautiful coffee table magazine that's just full of lies and nonsense, talking about sustainability and how wonderful it's going to be for beef producers. And what they're doing, they are just strictly carrying water for the packers. They are just strictly parasites. And here's an example. There's the Humane Society's logo over here. And the language, Humane Society language, is laced all the way through the Global Roundtable propaganda. And NCBA has bought off on it, hook, line, and sinker, even to the point where they modified their logo to look like the Humane Society's logo. So, this is a rash statement. The GRSB is a privately owned, totalitarian government, and they intend for you to be their subjects. That's how it is. So consider now for the case of the transnational private government. So what that is to say is transnational private government. That is to say it's a privately owned government. It doesn't belong to any nation. It's not American. It's not the United States. It's every nation. It operates above the level of government, of elected governments, appointed governments. So what does a government do? Any government. What it does two things. It writes rules and it enforces rules. That's all it does. So how do they do that? How does the government usually force its subjects into compliance? Well, there's lots of ways. They'll sue you. They'll fine you. They'll throw you in jail. And usually some combination of those three will get you to do what they want. Will make it uncomfortable enough that you will do that. So that's how a regular government, a government that you're accustomed to, gets its people to do what it wants. So you ask yourself, how does the GRSB obtain the power of government? How do they get the power that a government has? And the reason is they're standing between you and the market. How does it get the power? It's market concentration and collusion. And I can tell you with the market concentration, 85%, they don't need as much collusion. And if the market concentration was less, they'd need a little more collusion, but you find the right balance. So you need that, and then what they need is mandatory traceability. Now that is the same as the ear tag, an RFID ear tag in all your animals. So when they want mandatory traceability, these are the two things that they need to start running your ranch. They will start running your ranch if they have the right mix of collusion and market concentration plus full chain traceability, all locked down by an ear tag. So let's talk about the traceability aspect of this. I have fallen in love with this picture, and I know I've shown it before. But so here's this little guy, and he is so cute, and he's got 6 legs, and he's in Switzerland somewhere. And so you ask yourself, why does this guy? I mean, they go out to the crowd and they look around there, and they can't tell which one he is. So they got not 1 but 2 ear tags. So they know which one he is. They go, I'm looking for number, 3417. Have you seen him? And so the answer is, the Swiss government makes them put these tags in. They've got to have that tag in that animal. If they don't have that animal tagged, then they're in violation. And then they can either fine them, throw them in jail. But the reason he's got a tag is because of the mandatory traceability rules. So in this last 2 years, we've had some other illustrations of mandatory traceability that are just frankly terrifying. And as the virus issue has developed, there's a big push now for vaccine passports. And there's been an organization, and it's run by Microsoft, it's run by Bill Gates, it's run by the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's called the ID 2020 Alliance. And how they've sold this is that there's a lot of poor people out there who don't have an identification. And it's a human right to have an identification, and it should be an electronic identification, and one that goes with you your whole life. And just think about showing up in a refugee camp and you don't have your electronic identification. You got no way to prove who you are. And so these guys are trying to help them out by sticking them with an electronic identification first thing, early on in their life. And if you follow this website is, it's expansive. It's worth reading. It's worth looking into. You can't believe what these guys are talking about. And the doublespeak, and it's just shocking. And it's like, here's one of the pages, okay? We have now, and they're excited about this, we have now a unique convergence of trends provides an unprecedented opportunity to make a coordinated, concerted push to provide digital ID to everyone. Now, I just can't think that it's coincidental that the bankers are trying to push electronic ID on everyone, and the bankers are trying to push electronic ID on our cattle. And it has exactly the same impact, which is total surveillance 100% of the time. And, these guys have news stories, and you get on there must be a half dozen of them where they are just giddy with the prospect of an electronic vaccine passport. And they scarcely, in their justification for coming forward with the ID 2020, which is now, the project's 4 or 5 years old, they scarcely mention the health aspect of it. It's just for all these other reasons. And I can tell you that as soon as they have an electronic ID for you, however it is that you take that, either you maybe it's something on your cell phone, maybe it's a chip, a transmitter, something you wear, but it will be your health record. It will be your bank account. It will be a repository of your social credit score. So that and they're doing this in China now, okay? If you screw up, you get, just like on your credit rating, only it's what kind of person you are. So if you screw up, they ding your social credit score. Now your kid can't go to the right college. Now you can't get on the bus. Now you have to wait at the end of the line because you have a bad social credit score. Now, that is exactly what these folks have in mind. And so how does that relate to animal identification? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So you count on our old friends at the NCBA. Here, I got to tell you about this, and most everybody knows about it, but Harriet Hageman's back there somewhere in those lights. She's a lawyer from Cheyenne, Wyoming, and she works for an organization called the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and she represented RCAF and me and my wife and Kenny and Roxy Fox. And we sued the federal government, I guess it's 2 years ago now, when they had a Hail Mary effort to force animal identification on producers. And when I say a Hail Mary, plainly they didn't have the authority to do what they did, but they put up a thing on their website that said everybody has to have electronic ID for their cattle on this timeline. And so we sued them. Like 3 weeks later, we won. No, that just doesn't happen. But they threw in the towel. They pulled that fact sheet down. They pulled the thing off the website that said that that's what the timeline was. We won in 3 weeks because of Harriet and because of RCAF and because of Kenny Fox. And frankly, I was along for the ride. So parts of that lawsuit are still alive in the form of an appeal that Harriet's working on. She's going to appeal another judgment. Here's one of the things that happened. So they had a working, what they called a working group. So Kenny Fox is on this working group, and they're trying to come up with electronic ID. The other people that are on this working group are ear tag people, giant feedlots, people that you might see on that list of members of the Global Roundtable. And so Kenny kept telling them, no, we don't want to do electronic identification. No, we don't. No, we don't want to do that. So what they said was, well, we're having a hard time reaching consensus here, so let's dump Kenny. So the next meeting they show up and new constituent group, more select group of the original working group, and not Kenny. So one of Harriet's causes of action, one of the things that she sued on was the fact that this was an illegally constituted advisory group to the federal government. And we got an adverse ruling on that, but Harriet's appealing that. So I really want to thank New Civil Liberties Alliance and Harriet for her work on this. She's an excellent attorney and, frankly, tough as nails. She dresses funny, I gotta say that. So anyway. Here's what happens. So the federal government throws in the towel on their effort to require electronic ID. They throw in the towel. And if nobody had said anything, they would have gone ahead with it and acted like they'd done it properly. If nobody had said anything. But we did. RCAF did. Harriet did. Kenny and Roxy did. I was along for the ride. So in the shadow of that, what happened was a public-private partnership called Cattle Trace came out and is making a private sector move to accomplish the same thing. So Cattle Trace, and it was, there's, where are you, Hemmert? Kansas State, everybody in Kansas, and the NCBA are putting forward this cattle trace thing, which is essentially the same thing. It's a requirement that you have to get an ear tag before they'll buy your cattle. So far, Tyson claims that they have invested in cattle trace. Cargill says that they have joined cattle trace, but it's a private sector, private government attempt to force RFID because the USDA's failed. And I think the USDA has just said, this is too much work. We have to go through the rulemaking. We don't want to do it. Let you guys go ahead and see what you can get done by yourself by just choking the supply chain. And again, NCBA is in favor of cattle trace. And, if you want to have an electronic ear tag and you want to keep that data and you want to use it for your own management purposes, that's a great thing to do because it's a powerful tool. There's a lot of things you can do with that information, but that's your information. That doesn't belong to the federal government, and it doesn't belong to Cargill, and it doesn't belong to Tyson. And they say, the cattle trace people say, oh, this is one of the big deals we got going here is we got a real special spot over here for that data. Nobody will ever see it. I know. So so Tyson invests in this, and you think Tyson is not going to have access to that information? I mean, how about this? How about if cattle trace says, if that information happens to get loose and somebody happens to get it by hook or crook, how about the guy in charge of cattle trace go to jail for 20 years? How about that? I wonder if Mr. Cattle Trace would think that data was worth keeping then. So I want to tell you, beware of the public-private partnership. And you hear about it all the time. This, one public-private partnership after another public-private partnership. And so what these guys do is they get a governmental entity and corporations, or a governmental entity or educational institutions, or some combination of that. And then they shift the responsibilities back and forth to avoid things like the requirement that they disclose publicly held information, transparency. So if you file a Freedom of Information request, they will dodge that by saying, well, that belongs to that part of it over here. That's a private side. We don't have to comply, and they don't. You can ask Cargill if they want that information, want to give you that information, but they don't have to. So beware when you see anybody say it's a public-private partnership. It sounds really cozy, and it sounds efficient because people are working together. It's none of those things. So these are companies that are active pawns for the three entities that I showed you on one of the first slides: the United Nations, World Wildlife Fund, and the banks. Unilever, Walmart, Nestle, Tyson Foods, Mars, the candy bar people, Dannon Yogurt, L'Oreal. There's lots of them. But every time they need something, every time the UN or the banks need something, they trot these guys out and they participate in a public-private partnership. So Tyson is a willing public-private partner. About whenever anybody needs one of those guys needs something, they call on Tyson, and Tyson will oblige. So for instance, Tyson has recently offered a statement and made a statement that all of their employees are going to be required to take a vaccination or lose their job. All of them. Now, you can have whatever attitude you have about vaccinations, but it's about the same thing as the number of people who are participating with ear tags. So if you have enough people that take an ear tag, then the remaining people without an ear tag lose leverage. And the same thing with the vaccinations. So if the more people that take the vaccination, the more people when they say what you need now is a vaccine passport, then the people who have decided not to take a vaccine are left more and more powerless. So here's Tyson steps into the breach, and they say, well, we'll require it of our employees, which is a lot of people. So, and there are other corporations that are doing that. United Airlines, Tyson, you hear about more of them all the time. Colleges, if an American citizen wants to go to Canada, you can get into Canada if you've got a vaccination. Canadian can't leave Canada and go back in. An American citizen can go out. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There's no method or rhyme or reason to it, but it's more and more people that are going to find a reason to get a vaccination that will make it easier to move immediately to a vaccine passport. And it's exactly what they're doing with the ear tags. It is the same thing. So, and I mentioned that Tyson has invested in cattle trace. Something else that Tyson does is McDonald's has a thing called McDay, MCDEI, which is something about the pursuit of diversity. So Tyson's, McDonald's says, here's what we want you to do. We want you to get out there and source stuff from all manner of people, including LGBTQ+. So I looked on this list and I go, I ought to fit in here somewhere, right? I mean, there ought to be something in this for me. Something. So I mean, back in the day, it was, it was LGBT. And then it was LGBTQ. And now it's LGBTQ plus. So and the only thing I can find any place in my heart for is the L part. Because I like girls. And I completely understand that aspect of it. And I want to know what the plus is. I mean, after you've run by the LGBTQ, what's left? I mean, plus what? What kind of aberration would you have to have in order to need to fall into the plus? I don't know. So, but anyway, and then women, right? And so the whole category is women and then LGBTQ plus. So it's like my wife, who, if anybody knows my wife, she is a very competent person. And she doesn't need any sort of preferential treatment in order to kick your butt. And my mother was like that, and my grandmother, and I'll bet every one of you women in here is the same way. Now, how demeaning is it that these people are going to source product from women and also LGBTQ plus? But that's how it is. So, and Tyson is doing this, and McDonald's is doing this because they are willing members and willing stooges for the people driving the global roundtable, who've said what we want you to do is degrade your culture as far as possible by allowing an accommodation, a special accommodation for people that fit in this category. So I want to talk to you a little bit about cattle and the blockchain and the Panopticon. And this isn't really, I just thought this really answered a lot of questions. It was just a concept I ran across recently, the Panopticon. And what it was an architectural design for a prison. And there was a guard tower, and it's surrounded by the jail cells in a circle. And the bright lights are on in the jail cells, and they can't tell. The guards are in the guard tower, and they can't tell who's there looking at any given moment. So it had the effect of prisoners self-enforcing their conduct because they never knew when they would be under surveillance. And the effect of that was that it took much less manpower to surveil the whole group because everybody was afraid to do anything wrong because they might be under surveillance at that given moment. And the architect called it a panopticon. So when you talk about the blockchain, and I don't know if anybody knows about that, the blockchain gets synonymized or considered in the same breath as Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a very interesting, very beautiful, almost perfect form of money, if you understand it. And so let's just say we all trade Bitcoin in here. So and I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I can, and I don't understand all of it, so I don't want to get in over my head. But let's say we all trade Bitcoin. Everybody in here has a wallet or an account for Bitcoin. So if two people in the back there want to exchange a Bitcoin, that has to go out on everybody's computer before that transaction is finalized. And the effect of that is they can't corrupt that data because they would have to corrupt everybody's computer. So it's called a distributed ledger because everybody's keeping track of that. And it's still an anonymous transaction, but everybody has that on their computer. And the transaction is not finalized until everybody's account agrees. So that's the beauty of Bitcoin. But the blockchain is merely an assemblage of pieces of data. So if you have a blockchain for your ear tag, you would have on there the information that the calf was born on a certain date, that he was ear tagged on a certain date, and these would be individual pieces of data that would have associated with them a date and timestamp. So got a vaccine on such and such a date, got branded on such and such a date, got sick on such and such a date, doctored, change pastures. And so you'd have this whole history of this calf, and you just have that at your disposal in a computer. All that information would get entered in there. But rather than the distributed ledger, it's a centralized ledger. That is to say, all that information is kept in one place. And somebody's got to enter that data, and it's not going to be a third-party verifier. It's going to be you. You're going to have to enter that data. But the Panopticon aspect of this is, if you lie or if you cheat, and if you didn't vaccinate on the date you said you did, and they catch you, you could be banned forever from participating in cattle sales. So the mere chance that you might get detected makes you afraid and makes you compliant. And so what you have with this sort of blockchain, and this is what Tyson is talking about. They're talking about a shared database. Stakeholders in the supply chain are expected to contribute information to the data stream. You're expected to disclose all that information. And then it goes into this database that can't be changed. And it's a single place where all transactions are recorded. Now, who's going to hold that? Like Tyson is going to hold that. So all the things that are neat and cool and brilliant about Bitcoin don't apply to the blockchain as these people intend to use it. So, and you get, the more you study Bitcoin, just you have to just say this is really cool. And none of that applies here. It's all different, and it's piggybacking on that good reputation. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention continuous improvement. Jason Clay talked about it in the video, where you get people started on the path of continuous improvement. You might balk if they came in and told you that you had to do a particular practice, if it was burdensome to you. But you might not balk if the difference was that they won't buy your cattle unless you tell them what breed of cattle you're running. But you might balk if they said, we need the weight and date of birth and everything else about that animal before we'll buy your cattle. So they get you started somewhere. They get you started on the path of continuous improvement where it doesn't matter where you start, just so long as you start somewhere. And then they keep upping the ante, and they keep ratcheting up the requirements until they have absolute control of your place. And the more locked down you are with an electronic identification, the more they will push with the continuous improvement. So if they ask you to do something, they'll back that way off to get you started. They'll get it down to the point where it won't even seem objectionable, but they'll ratchet it up and up and up. And that's exactly what Jason Clay's talking about when he's talking about continuous improvement. So here's another Jason Clay movie.
We actually need collusion around sustainability at every level with every type of institution. Where do we start? Who do we work with? How do we work on these issues? This is new ground for us. So we decided we needed to map it out. There's 6.8 billion consumers, give or take, maybe closer to 7 today. Do we work with all those? Do we work with the 1.4 billion producers of all these different products? Do we change the way they produce things? Or do we focus on the narrower neck, the pinch point in each of these commodities where 300 to 500 companies control 70 to 80% of each of those 15 commodities that we care about? We decided that this is the strategy that we could actually get our arms around.
So the picture of the wine glass, I don't know if I put it back, yeah, I did. This really tells the whole story of the power, the allocation of power, the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. So you've got in this, in the bowl of the champagne glass, that's where is to illustrate the great number of consumers. And then down below, that's where you're, a smaller number of producers. Then over here's the threats that you guys are causing to the land, and how they're going to insulate the planet from you guys being such no account, irresponsible, rapacious cowboys. So the way they do that is on the narrow neck of the supply chain right here. And in this case, in the beef world, it's the packers. Okay, that's the narrow choke point of the supply chain. And then over here you have the investors. So what this means, what he's talking about, and this is really a very serious admission against their interest. They used to be kind of cagey about this, not so much anymore. These investors are steering money toward or away from producers, packers, retailers, anybody else. They'll steer that money toward them if they're playing the game, and they'll steer that money away from them if they're not. And the bankers have the hammer. So that's what this picture means. That's where the power comes from. That's why it's a global government, sure as any other kind. It's because those people are sitting at the choke point. And Jason Clay talks about in that video, he talks about comparing the production to credible standards. So, if you look up credible, it means it's able to be believed. It's a believable standard. So it's not an effective standard, and it's not one that might be useful. It's one that we might be able to sell people. We might be able to convince people that this is really what we're doing, if it's a credible standard. So one of the things that's happened in the last year since I talked to you was the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef came up with its global sustainability goals. And one of them is climate, to reduce the net global warming impact of beef by 30%, to ensure the beef value chain is a net positive contributor to nature, and to provide cattle with an environment in which they can thrive, achieved through increased adoption of best practices. Now, whatever the hell any of that means, okay, this was their big push this year, was to come out with those. Now, that's way subject to their interpretation, way subject. And I got to Google, however evil they are, they're useful. And I've got an alert system built into Google. So every time I see the words, or that it finds the words Global Roundtable on an article, then it sends me an alert, and then I can read the article. So there must have been 25 articles that came out after the Global Roundtable announced these 3 criteria. And they all said these glowing, they circulated around newspapers, all the ag reporters around the world wrote articles about how, beef is rolling up its sleeves to save the planet. And it's this echo chamber where their message comes out and it gets bounced around and around and around, and people are just saturated with it to the point where they believe that this must be something credible. And it's not. So beware the echo chamber. Beware the media echo chamber. And we have to figure out a way to confront that. Now, this is a brief comparison of how many people think our government sucks? Okay. Is there anybody who thinks our government does not suck? Okay. But so, and I'm with you guys, except for this other thing. And so if you want to talk about our government, what do we got? We got elected officials. We vote for them for whatever good it does, but we vote for them. There's 3 branches of government. There's checks and balances between them. There's an established legislative process. There's an extensive opportunity for appeal and review. So that's something. Even the administrative rules, it's something. It's some kind of process where you get some input. Here's the transnational private government. No elected officials. This is whoever the banks put in there. No checks and balances. It's arbitrary as it wants to be. They can treat you way different than they can treat your neighbor, and there's nobody to complain to. There's no input. You don't get any chance for input. There's no discussion, and there's no appeal. Now that makes our form of government look pretty darn good. Now I put this, all right, so the GRSB, you go to their website, they've got a vision statement and a mission statement. And what it is a plagiarism, a rehash of a paragraph out of the the Soviet Union's constitution. It is straight up communist, top-down drivel. And you wouldn't know that unless you just happen to Google continuous improvement, and this pops up. But it is a straight up plagiarism. So what's happened since last year? Last time I talked to you, this is a big deal, is the banks have absolutely uncloaked. That is to say, they are now very vocal about the fact that if you want to borrow money, you will have to dance to their tune in terms of climate disclosure. So, and they're aggregating their money. There's about 4 of them maybe. There's one called CDP, it's Carbon Disclosure Project. They got $100 trillion in combined assets under investments under administration. And by that I mean, these guys have decided that they're going to steer money toward or away from corporations that are playing their game. So if you want to beg permission from them based on your carbon footprint, they might loan you some money, and if you don't, they won't. So there's Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP. There's one called Ceres that deals more with water issues. BlackRock, you may have heard about BlackRock. They got $7 trillion, the largest private hedge fund. And there's one called FAAIR, FAIR, and it's animal welfare, and they've got several $1 trillion also. The difference between BlackRock is that's all in-house, their money, and FAAIR is several different banks and institutional investors pool their money for these purposes. So that's one thing that's happened, is the banks are no longer being catty or coy about this. They're just out in the open about, if you don't do what we say, we're not loaning you money. Something that's happened since last year is there's a lot more tension, I feel, between the packers and the retailers in this global roundtable. And about every couple, 3 weeks, you'll see a news article about one packer or another has paid off some bunch of people that have sued them for antitrust issues. And sometimes it's the suppliers, and sometimes it's the retailers that they're supplying. But I just saw the other day where McDonald's was suing some of their suppliers for antitrust. And that tells me that there is friction between the retailers and the packers. And in fact, you watch these packers gain market concentration through vertical and horizontal integration. And Walmart responded by starting its own packing plant and its own beef supply chain, because I think that they see coming ahead packers trying to lever them rather than the other way around. So there's an opportunity there to exploit for us, but we got to talk about that. We've got to have people a lot smarter than me, people that's Bullard every day. We've got to talk about how we can exploit that difference. So what to do? Because we're in a pickle. And it's not getting better. So the first thing that we have to do is recognize the struggle for what it is. We have to be honest with ourselves. And we got to know that this is a true existential crisis. And now by that I mean this is our very existence is hinging on this phenomenon. And you have to, you like being an alcoholic. I mean, you got to stand up in the morning and go, this is a big deal, and I'm going to be part of it. So, and it's a spiritual divide. It's us on one side, we represent good and truth, and you have evil on the other side. And it's spiritual. And if you don't want to play that game, you need to get out now while your land is still worth something. Your opponent, This is what you need to you got to recognize. Your opponent is operating at the highest level of power. They are the bankers, the World Wildlife Fund, or United Nations is operating at the primary level of power. And the packers are at a secondary level. And the retailers. And it's you against them. And so are you going to fight about this? Or are you just going to fold your tent? Because right now, your land is still worth something. And your assets are still worth something. But if this program goes unchecked, you will not be able to generate revenue from your real estate. If your ear tags do not get into the computer, your premises registration will not be effective. You will own nothing, and you'll still be paying taxes on it. So are you going to fight, or are you going to die? This is something you can do, and everybody needs to do this to the extent that they're able at all, is get out of debt. Get out of debt. And if what that means is you have to sell some land or sell some assets or downsize, or if there's any way you can get out of debt, that will give you a lot more options going forward. Because these guys, Rabobank, they will pick you out and say, your line of credit is over with. And if not them, it'll be one of the member banks in their organizations, in their consortiums. So get out of debt, if there's any way to do that. Plan right now on how you intend to market your own beef, that you and your neighbors. And I don't talk to Mike Calicrate because he will depress you. But you'll learn something. So I think, and I'm probably wrong about this, I think the demand for beef is strong. People want to eat beef. People do not want to eat puss burgers. They don't want to eat algae formed in there. They don't want that. They want to eat beef. They'd rather eat beef than pork or chicken. So will your school districts buy any of your product? Will your grocery store help you out? Will they mark some of their beef as genuine USA beef? You need to explore these things, and you need to start thinking about how you're going to slaughter and retail your own product. You've got to start talking about that. And you got to confront the lies and the propaganda. Now, this was an interesting thing. I subscribe to a paywall thing. It's called Meeting Place, and it's articles are all about the meat industry. And so they put out like half a dozen articles a day. And they also have 20 different guys who write a blog periodically. So 3 different times now with those guys. There's a place where you can comment. So 2 guys and this was a couple of years ago, they started talking about how wonderful the Global Roundtable was. And I wrote in the comments, I said, you're a member of that. And this is what it's really about. It's not, all that crap that they're, that they're telling you about. This is what it's really about. And you're lying to these people. And one of those guys went, I went to a meeting one time, but I wasn't a member. And I found that matrix that shows all the members. Well, his company's right there. So I wrote back and I said, well, just look right here. You are a member and you're lying to these folks. And he never said, and he writes really well. He's an entertaining writer. He has never mentioned that again in 2 years. And it was because I drug him out on the carpet. And there's another guy, his name's Navilka, I can't remember. He's an ag economist. And he was talking about how great all this stuff was. And I said, you're a member of that too. The company that owns you is a member of that, and you need to disclose that. You're lying to these folks. And he went, well, I'm not a member of that. And I said, no, the guy you work for is a member of it. So he never mentioned it again, and then he went on to write an article talking about how people need to start taking a better look at the Global Roundtable. And he was thoroughly embarrassed. And that was a good thing. And just the other day, a chef, somebody, I can't remember what his name is. So he's talking about consumer demand and how consumers are demanding sustainable beef. And I wrote and I said, show me your information that supports that allegation. Show me where it says consumers are demanding. Because I can tell you right now, they're not. They are not. And so that article went down, came off the page. About 2 weeks later, it came back up, and he rewrote it. He said, I talked to some of my friends and neighbors, and they support. I mean, he changed the verbiage of his column so it did not claim that consumers were demanding it. It said he had friends who were demanding it. That's different. So when you see the propaganda, and when you see the nonsense, and you see the lies, you have to confront it. And you can do that in blogs, in those ag papers. You can call them up on the phone. But if they know they're not getting away with it, they're not going to do it. Or they're going to do it, they're going to be sneakier. They're going to do something. But I found in 3 out of 3 times, those people change their behavior. And we need to talk about this too. We need to organize resistance to the media, because it's like anything else where, you know, they couldn't get away with that stuff in Afghanistan. They couldn't get away with stuff with the vaccines if the newspapers reported honestly. And they don't. And so newspapers, particularly ag newspapers, and I was talking to Brian about this just a little bit. If we did something along the lines of boycotting advertisement in those newspapers, let me give this example. Your implement dealer advertises in the Tri-State, which, by the way, is one of the better ones. The local agricultural paper, the Tri-State's one of the better ones. So your implement dealer advertises there, and you go to your implement dealer and say, I'm tired of you sponsoring these people who put this nonsense out and who participate in the echo chamber and talk about how great the Global Roundtable is. I'm tired of that, and so I'm going to boycott you if you don't boycott the newspaper. And I'm guessing that it wouldn't take very many of us to boycott an implement dealer before that implement dealer would have a conversation with that newspaper and tell them they need to engage in some honest journalism. And I think we need to explore that, because otherwise, we've been trained to be media observers. So newspaper reports whatever it reports, and you go, oh, well, that's, I don't know what we do about that. Well, there is something you can do about it, because those guys got to turn a buck too. And we've got to find a way to get to their cash flow. And I just want to talk to you a bit about the difference between a grassroots movement and an AstroTurf movement. Okay, so when they say people are demanding sustainable beef, a grassroots thing is when, you know what that is, right? It just comes from spontaneously generates from the people. It's a discussion that everybody wants to take part in. An AstroTurf movement is a phony one. It's one that they are trying to propagate. So the AstroTurf movement here is consumers are demanding sustainable beef. That's not true. But what they want to get something going so maybe someday it is true. But for now, it is not true. And so beware, and you have to just ask yourself, what's your source? What's your data? How do you prove your allegation that consumers are demanding X, Y, Z? Because I can tell you what consumers are demanding. They want beef. They want it at a fair price. And they want something that tastes good, is nutritious for their family. And then sustainability isn't even in the top 20 things that people want. But the newspapers just go on and on and on about consumer demand for sustainable beef. It's a falsehood. So, and here's something else we need to do. We need to stand up for RCAF. And what we need to do is we need to go home and take a tour of our neighborhood, invite our friends out, have a potluck dinner, some way to contact our people so that every one of us in this room recruits 10 new members by this time next year. And if you have to subsidize half of their membership the first year, if you have whatever you got to do, we've got to increase our membership. And one of the reasons is that that's the people in D.C. when we go talk to them, they want to know what our membership is, so they got to know how much attention to pay us. If you say, well, we got 5,000 members, I go, well, NCBA's got 17,000 or whatever. So we need to increase our membership, and we've got a reprieve on the referendum on the beef checkoff. And they absolutely couldn't do any of this stuff if they didn't have that beef checkoff money. If they didn't have the face and name and the honest reputation of us that they're putting on the front of this sustainability movement, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And the way they get to do it is because they get that beef checkoff money. And we've got to get that referendum on the ballot. So do the same thing. Go around to your friends and neighbors and who is going to object to an election? Who's going to say, I'm not going to sign that, I don't like elections? But they don't know about it. They don't know, it's not in front of them. Nobody's forcing them to it. Force them to it. Take them the petition. Tell them you need their signature. All it's about is an election. They can vote against it if they want to. But we've got to do those two things. And then we get those people to go out and get 10 more themselves. And pretty soon we're going to have a convoy, good buddy. I mean, we've got to get some membership, and we've got to get some participation.